Who was Fred Noonan, Emilia Earhart's navigator? Some 82 years following the mysterious disappearance of the famed aviator Emilia Earhart, news of Titanic researcher Bob Ballard's attempt to locate the doomed aircraft recently made headlines, promoting renewed interest in the historic female pilot. But Earhart was not alone on the flight. Navigator Fred Noonan also disappeared that July day, a man with an impressive story of his own. He certainly doesn't get the attention that Emilia gets. News of Noonan, who vanished alongside Earhart on July 2, 1937, during a flight from Papua New Guinea to Howland Island in the Pacific. Born in April 1893 in Chicago, Noonan's mother was Catherine Egan's, an immigrant from England who died of tuberculosis when Noonan was 4 years old, and his father was a man named Joseph T. Noonan. Not much is known about Noonan's childhood, and it's not clear if the then future navigator had any siblings. What is known, however, is Noonan is tall, slender, auburn-haired, blue-eyed man of Irish descent. Led a storied career as a sailor before he ever began to fly. On the high seas for nearly 2 decades, Noonan became an expert navigator, known in particular for his celestial navigator abilities, a skill that would greatly serve him when in 1930 he made a drastic career change and took his talents from the sea to the skies. He saw it as a job opportunity. Gillespie, the author of Finding Emilia, the true story of Earhart's disappearance, said, in 1930, Noonan, who married a woman named Hosea Sullivan 3 years prior, received his pilot's license. Weeks after, he prematurely listed his occupation as aviator while registering to vote in New Orleans. His aviation abilities, combined with his navigation skills, later earned Noonan a job with Pan American Airways. In the mid-1930s, Pan American was looking to expand their routes to the Pacific, and the idea was to fly across the Pacific to the Philippines. Gillespie said, adding such an initiative was unheard of at the time. In 1935, Noonan was named a navigation officer for Pan American's Clipper service, largely working on the Martin M130 flying boat, China Clipper. Noonan charted the navigation routes for the company's Clipper service, in part by using celestial navigation, much like he did during his days as a sailor, Gillespie said. In fact, in a letter to the well-known U.S. Navy officer and air navigator, Lieutenant Commander P.V.H. Weems, Noonan was quoted as saying his navigation was comparable with such as would be practiced afloat, per Tigar. In November of 1935, following months of preparation, Noonan led the navigation on a China Clipper flight from San Francisco to Manila, the capital of the Philippines. This was the inaugural flight for what would become routine once-a-week Trans-Pacific service, notes Tigar. Following the success, Noonan was something of a celebrity in his own right, said Gillespie. By 1937, however, Noonan's life drastically changed. Once the weekly flying schedules to Manila were established, Edwin Musick, the then chief pilot for Pan Am, realized the constant long-distance outwater flying was taking a physical and mental toll on the crews. The Manila trip was 12 days of flying without proper rest intervals, and the pilots were averaging many hours per month than the limits established by the Department of Commerce regulations. The tedious nature of the job took a toll on Noonan, who was still tasked with navigating the flights at that time. The schedule also reportedly impacted his marriage, as Noonan and his wife, Jose, were divorced in March of that year. He remarried a woman named Mary Beatrice Martinelli not long after their divorce became final. It was also around this time Noonan reportedly began to drink heavily. Though there is much debate about whether this is true, stories surrounding the airman's alleged drinking problem first emerged in 1966 in the book The Search for Emilia Earhart by Fred Gurnier. The claims made in the publication are said to be based on a police report from 1937. PBS reported in 2014, though that report's whereabouts is unknown. It was also in 1937 that Noonan would be approached with the opportunity of a lifetime, in what unknowingly was his last, joining Earhart as a crew member on her journey to the first pilot to circumnavigate the world. Though Earhart had already enlisted the Marine officer Harry Manning as her navigator, she recruited Noonan to also be a part of her crew, possibly because of his well-known celestial navigation abilities. Noonan gladly accepted her offer, as joining Earhart was an advantageous press opportunity for the sailor-turned-aviator who was reportedly considering starting a schooling for navigation. Initially, the plan was for Noonan to fly with Earhart and Manning to Howling Island in the Central Pacific, but plans changed, and he was asked to stay on board to possibly fly as far as Australia. On March 17, 1937, Noonan, alongside Earhart, Manning, and the stunt flyer Paul Mance, who served as Earhart's advisor, took off from Oakland, California to Hawaii. They arrived successfully, and a couple days later, Manning, Earhart, and the Noonan took off for the around-the-world flight. But during takeoff, Earhart lost control of her plane and ultimately damaged it. The crew returned to the U.S. where the plane was repaired. Manning announced he would no longer join Earhart and Noonan on the venture. Though no one was injured, he was reportedly spooked by the incident. Months later, on May 29, 1937, Noonan and Earhart took off once more, leaving from Miami, Florida to Puerto Rico. After arriving in Lae, New Guinea, the two took off again, but for the first time. The pair would famously disappear on the flight to Howland Island. Their fate became one of the great mysteries of the 20th century and remains hotly debated. The Coast Guard ship Itasca recorded the pair's last heard transmission, which occurred roughly 20 hours before they were airborne. Gillespie, who holds the theory Earhart died on the remote island of Nicaragua, a coral atoll 1,200 miles from the Marshall Islands, blames their disappearance on negligence. While Noonan was a very good celestial navigator, neither he nor Earhart knew much about radio, which really put them at a disadvantage. In fact, the flight to Howland depended heavily on Fred's navigation, which required an accurate time check. Decades later, the mystery surrounding their disappearance ensues, sparking Bob Ballard, the explorer who discovered the wreck of the Titanic in 1985, to search for answers on the island of Nicaragua, also known as Gardner Island. In 1940, some 13 human bones were found on the island. A 2018 forensic analysis claimed the bones belonged to the female aviator. The expedition, which is backed by National Geographic, began on August 7th and will last until August 25th. Researchers are using underwater drones to search for Earhart's plane in the waters around the island. Earhart is the most famous female flyer in the world, but Gillespie, whose organization was conducted decades of research on Earhart's disappearance and has visited Nicomoro on a number of occasions in search for clues, is doubtful there's anything left to find, rating the likelihood of finding Earhart's plane at less than 20%. The reef slope at Nicomoro is a steep, unstable mountainside strewn with boulders, cliffs, and caves, and prone to underwater landslides. There may be nothing left to find. And as from Newnan, what happened to the navigator may forever remain a mystery. Emilia Earhart is the most famous female flyer in the world. Madeline Farber